Okay, let's kick off with part two, where I'm going to give you a briefing on, well, what is happening with transport here? Where are we up to? So the good news is that in Greater Manchester, our Mayor Andy Burnham has said that building an affordable integrated public transport system with walking and cycling embedded is his number one priority since getting re-elected. And he seems to be taking that, really fulfilling that, in that there are a number of steps listed out here, bringing buses back into public control, the clean air zone next year, which will tackle pollution, new trams, wants to bring railway stations in Greater Manchester in his control, and a number of other things, including the B network, a plan for 1,800 miles of walking and cycling network that he kicked off at the start of his last term. And he's in the process of bidding for a significant amount of money from the Department of Transport for these ambitions in Greater Manchester, with an overall goal that by 2040, half of all journeys here would be walked, cycled, or taken by public transport, and the other half driven. So that's the good news. And Burnham's right-hand deputy on this is Chris Boardman, his Transport Commissioner. And Chris is asking this question: what would I need from this network for me to choose it over driving? And that's exactly the right question to be asking. On the flip side, basically the goals that have been set are maybe 10 years too late, given the changes that we're seeing with our climate. Even the government's decarbonisation plan talks about shifting that level of walking and cycling and public transport to be 50% by 2030, not by 2040. And in Manchester, it's a similar case. We've got some headline visions, but few steps that are going to get us anywhere fast in the next 5 years. And don't forget that our zero carbon framework in Manchester says we need to halve our carbon emissions in the next 5 years. And as I've set out, transport is a third of those emissions, so it has a big role to play. On the upside, Manchester does have a compelling vision around this. The city centre transport strategy wants to make Manchester a walking city, and it's ideal for that. And to make 90% of journeys in and out of the city centre in peak time by walking, cycling and public transport. There are lots of new schemes happening. Deansgate in the centre of Manchester, the plan is to make, prevent private cars using that and just make it a much more pedestrian friendly space, and other schemes. And perhaps the biggest opportunity is that, if we win that funding, and we should, because Manchester's in a good place, then there's lots of opportunity for communities to influence the arrival of new schemes to introduce better walking and cycling where you live, within those strategic parameters, of course. And so what I'm showing you here are what Manchester says its 4 key transport outcomes are within the next 5 years. And you can see the number one priority is to increase the number of short journeys made by foot and bike across the city. And, that's great, because we know what benefits that can provide if the infrastructure is put in to enable that. And the second priority is to enable more sustainable travel to and from the district centres. And again, we really need that. And so what I've marked in black are schemes that are already underway, so perhaps not so much chance to influence. But the ones in red, they're just headline goals at the moment without the details filled in. So this is where, we should, in our communities, be saying, we want this here. We want to be able to move away from the private car. Please help us do that here. Here are what we would like to see to do that. Here's the support that you can count on. Because some of these schemes, they do attract some small opposition. And so politicians need to feel that public support to take those steps. So that's the summary. That we've got the right vision, but unfortunately things are moving more quickly than we are, and we need to bring some bolder, faster moves into play. So here's some examples of what other cities are doing to do that. So this is Newcastle, and Newcastle are bidding to be one of the UK's pilot low carbon transport small cities. This is, at the moment, that is a street that's dominated by cars, and that's how they want to change things in Newcastle. Really interesting what Birmingham are doing. So Birmingham are intending on transforming the entire centre of Birmingham into these 7 segments, the Jewellery Quarter, the South Side, the Knowledge Quarter. And each segment you wouldn't be able to drive from one segment into another. You can access a segment in your car if you live there or a business there, but you can't get around the city centre anymore through those segments. You can do that walking and cycling. And so what that does at an instant is make walking and cycling really pleasant, because it reduces traffic and it makes driving less convenient and less likely. And these are the kinds of measures that cities are going to have to introduce. And further than that, Birmingham have got far more ambitious goals than we have around things like cycling. By 2033, they want to make 10% of all trips by cycling. And Manchester's goals are far lower than that. By 2040, we're saying, so 7 years later, 6% of all trips would be by bike. And even then, only for peak time, not through the whole of the day. So you can see other cities are saying, no, we're going to go quicker. Leeds is another one. Now, Leeds is probably further behind Manchester. It doesn't have a tram, for instance. So in terms of low carbon transport, it's got further to catch up. But it's just finished this massive scheme to transform some of the key roads around the centre and make them bus priority, bus and walking and cycling. And I think this is a real model for Manchester, where we know buses are massively used. And to be fair, Deansgate, this is where Deansgate is heading. But Leeds have said that by 2030, if you can see down here where I've highlighted in red, by 2030, it wants to decrease private car use by 30%. That's a massive goal. And that's the kind of thing that we haven't yet set out here. And then there's Salford, not very far away at all. And what Salford are doing, and Salford are leading the way in terms of walking and cycling. They have by far the lion's share of the walking and cycling budget so far, because they've put forward so many compelling schemes. But what they're also doing is embedding the need to not have a car, to answer that question that Chris Boardman's setting, into their overall regeneration scheme. So on the left here is Salford Crescent. And if you're familiar with that area, it's not particularly, it's where the station is. Trying to get to the station without cars, virtually impossible. And the plan is to build this huge green area and park over the top of the railway, and to link those two sections of Salford and enable people to walk between them. And at the moment, that's a massive difference from that area now. And then on the right is the Chapel Wharf area, which is a series of railway arches which are being regenerated. And again, embedding walking and cycling into how people are going to be able to get around that area. So these are the things, a list here of 16 things that other cities, comparable cities in the UK, are all doing or have done, and that we haven't yet found a way to introduce into Manchester. And perhaps the time is coming that these are the things that we need to consider. But we're not going to consider those now. Bob and the rest of the team will feed those into you as part of the ongoing work to get to the manifesto. What you are going to do now is look at some things that you can do in your community. And I haven't talked much today about sort of personal change, and that's largely because I think, change has to happen as part of system change. We have to enable people to walk and cycle more. But there are some things that you could do individually. You could take the decision to walk or cycle more journeys. You could look out for a car club near you, perhaps, and move away from the need to own your own car. But perhaps the biggest benefit we can do is when, we team up and take action together. So this is what I'm going to ask you to think about in your groups now. So at the top left of this slide, and they'll be handed to you in a minute on a green sheet of paper, all the things that you can do in your community now if you wanted to, which help set out the case for change, but also perhaps help people move collectively, because it's easier to do stuff together, isn't it, than on your own. And in the bottom left of this screen are things where there's already funding for locally that you could apply for, or resources that you can get from various different organisations to help you do that in your community. And then in the middle, on the right, are those things that perhaps we need our city and our transport and our leaders to take, we'll come on to those at another time. So going to get you into groups now to think about those things on the left and see what you can come up with in your groups.